When I was 12, my parents told me to man up and find my own ride home, then left me at a gas station 80 miles away. I slept behind a dumpster that night. I never spoke to them again. Until last week, when I got a wedding invite from my brother with a note from them inside. The sound of the crisp envelope tearing open was a sound I hadn't associated with anything other than bills and junk mail for the past 15 years. But this one was different. It was thick, creamy cardstock, the kind of paper that whispered of special occasions and carefully chosen words. My brother, Ethan, was getting married. A genuine smile touched my lips for the first time in what felt like a long while. Ethan and I hadn't been close in years, not since the chasm had opened up between me and our parents, but the news still sparked a flicker of warmth in my chest. I imagined him, goofy, kind-hearted Ethan, finally finding someone to share his life with. I was happy for him, truly. But then, as I slid the invitation out, a smaller, folded piece of paper fluttered out and landed on my worn wooden coffee table. The handwriting was instantly recognizable, a tight, controlled script that sent a jolt of ice through my veins. It was my mother's. And next to it, a scrawled, almost aggressive signature that could only belong to my father. For a moment, I just stared at it, the invitation forgotten. The air in my small apartment suddenly felt thick, heavy, like the humid summer air of that night 15 years ago. The night I was 12, and my parents told me to man up and find my own ride home, then left me at a gas station 80 miles away. The night I slept behind a dumpster, the stench of garbage and fear my only companions. The night I decided I was done with them. And now, after all this time, a note. A single folded piece of paper that held the power to unravel the carefully constructed life I had built in their absence. My hand trembled as I reached for it, the memories I had fought so hard to suppress roaring back to life with the force of a tidal wave. It had been a family trip, one of those forced marches of familial bonding that my parents seemed to specialize in. We were driving back from a visit to my grandparents, a 6-hour journey that was already fraught with tension. My father was a man of few words, most of them critical. My mother was a woman who communicated primarily through sighs of disappointment. And I, at 12, was a bundle of awkward energy and unarticulated needs, a constant source of irritation for them both. Ethan, 4 years my senior, had mastered the art of invisibility, a skill I had yet to acquire. The arguments started, as they always did, over something trivial. I had been kicking the back of my father's seat, a nervous habit I couldn't seem to break. He had barked at me to stop, his voice like gravel. I had muttered something under my breath, a childish retort that was more about asserting my own existence than any real defiance. But in our family, any assertion of self was seen as a challenge to their authority. The car swerved to the side of the road, the tires screeching in protest. My father turned around, his face a thundercloud of rage. "You think you're a big man, huh?" Talking back to me, he had snarled, his eyes boring into mine. My mother, ever the enabler, had chimed in from the passenger seat, her voice dripping with saccharine disappointment. "Daniel, your father is tired. You've been nothing but a handful this entire trip." I had shrunk back in my seat, the familiar cocktail of fear and shame washing over me. But this time, something was different. A spark of defiance, a tiny flame of self-preservation, flickered within me. I didn't want to be a handful. I just wanted to be seen, to be heard, to be something other than a nuisance. The rest of the drive was a symphony of silence, each mile stretching into an eternity of unspoken resentment. When the gaslight flickered on, my father pulled into a desolate-looking station, the kind of place that seemed to exist in a pocket of forgotten time. As he filled the tank, my mother turned to me, her face a mask of cold fury. "Your father has had enough of your attitude," she had said, her voice barely a whisper. "He says if you're going to act like a man, you can find your own way home." I had stared at her, my mind struggling to process her words. It had to be a joke, a cruel, twisted joke. But the look in her eyes, the hard, unyielding set of her jaw, told me otherwise. My father had gotten back in the car, his face unreadable. He hadn't even looked at me. He had just started the engine, and as the car pulled away, leaving me standing there in the harsh glare of the gas station lights, a piece of my childhood had shattered into a million irreparable pieces. The first few hours were a blur of panic and disbelief. I had stood there, watching the taillights of our car disappear into the darkness, a hollow ache in my chest. I had no money, no phone, no idea where I was. Just the clothes on my back and a growing sense of terror. The gas station attendant, a grizzled old man with kind eyes, had taken pity on me. He had given me a can of soda and a bag of chips, and had let me sit in the corner of his small, cluttered office. He had even tried to call my parents, but there was no answer. Of course, there wasn't. They had made their point. As the night wore on, the initial shock gave way to a cold, hard reality. I was alone. Truly alone. The gas station closed at midnight, and the attendant, with a sad shake of his head, had told me he had to lock up. He had pointed to a dumpster behind the station, a dark, hulking shape in the shadows. "You can sleep behind there," he had said, his voice laced with a mixture of pity and resignation. "It's not much, but it'll keep you out of the wind." The stench was overwhelming, a putrid cocktail of rotting food and stale beer. But he was right. It was a shelter of sorts. I had huddled behind it, my knees pulled up to my chest, trying to make myself as small as possible. Every creak and groan of the old building, every rustle in the nearby bushes, sent a fresh wave of fear through me. I thought about my parents, about Ethan, warm and safe in their beds. Did they even care? Did they even wonder if I was alive? The tears came then, hot and silent, tracing a path through the grime on my face. I cried for the little boy who had been left behind, for the son who had been deemed unworthy of love and protection. And as the first rays of dawn painted the sky in shades of gray and pink, a new feeling began to take root in my heart, a feeling that would come to define me for the next 15 years, a steely, unyielding resolve. I would survive. I would make a life for myself. And I would never, ever let them hurt me again. The next morning, a truck driver found me, a kind-faced man with a booming laugh and a heart of gold. He had bought me breakfast, listened to my story with a mixture of horror and compassion, and had driven me to the nearest town, where he had dropped me off at the police station. The authorities had contacted my parents, of course. I can only imagine the carefully crafted story they had spun, the tale of a rebellious son who had run away, of frantic parents who had been searching for him all night. They had come to pick me up, their faces a mixture of feigned concern and barely concealed annoyance. There were no apologies, no explanations. Just a cold, hard silence that spoke volumes. From that day on, something had shifted between us. I was no longer their son, not in any real sense of the word. I was a stranger in their house, a ghost at their dinner table. I had thrown myself into my schoolwork, into sports, into anything that would keep me out of the house and away from their suffocating presence. I had gotten a part-time job as soon as I was old enough, saving every penny I could. The day I turned 18, I had packed my bags, walked out of that house, and had never looked back. I had put myself through college, working 2 jobs to make ends meet. I had built a life for myself from the ground up, a life that was mine and mine alone. I had friends, a career I was proud of, a small but comfortable apartment. I had even found love, a woman named Sarah who saw me for who I was, not for the broken boy I had once been. But the scars of that night remained, a constant, dull ache in my soul. I had never told anyone the full story, not even Sarah. It was a wound I kept hidden, a secret shame I carried with me every day. And now, this note. This single, folded piece of paper that threatened to rip it all open again. With trembling fingers, I unfolded the note. The words were simple, almost banal. "Daniel," it read, "we know we have no right to ask you for anything. But your brother is getting married, and it would mean the world to him if you were there. We miss you. We love you. Mom and Dad." The words were like a punch to the gut. Miss me? Love me? The hypocrisy was breathtaking. For 15 years, they had been perfectly content to live their lives without me. They had never once reached out, never once tried to apologize, to explain, to atone for what they had done. And now, because Ethan was getting married, they wanted to play happy families? A wave of anger, hot and fierce, surged through me. I wanted to crumple up the note, to throw it in the trash, to burn it until there was nothing left but ashes. But then, I thought of Ethan. Goofy, kind-hearted Ethan, who had been caught in the crossfire of our parents' cruelty. He deserved to have his family there on his wedding day. And as much as I hated to admit it, a small, treacherous part of me, the part that still yearned for the love and approval I had never received, wanted to see them. I wanted to look them in the eye and see if there was any remorse, any flicker of regret for what they had done. I wanted to know if they had ever, in the long, lonely years since that night, thought about the little boy they had left behind. The decision tore at me for days. I talked to Sarah about it, finally telling her the whole, ugly story. She had listened without judgment, her eyes filled with a compassion that I had never known from my own family. "You don't owe them anything, Daniel," she had said, her hand covering mine. "But you owe it to yourself to do whatever you need to do to heal." And she was right. This wasn't about them. It was about me. It was about confronting the ghosts of my past, about finally, after all these years, finding a way to move on. The wedding was to be held at a picturesque vineyard a few hours' drive from the city. As I drove, the miles ticking by, a sense of dread began to build in my stomach. What would I say to them? What would they say to me? Would it be a screaming match, a tearful reunion, or just another cold, empty silence? I arrived at the vineyard, a sprawling estate of rolling hills and manicured gardens. The ceremony was already underway, the guests seated in neat rows of white chairs. I spotted Ethan at the altar, looking handsome and nervous in his tuxedo. And then I saw them. My parents. They were older, of course, their hair streaked with gray, their faces etched with the lines of time. But they were still unmistakably them. My father, with his rigid posture and stern expression. My mother, with her perfectly coiffed hair and a smile that never quite reached her eyes. They saw me at the same time I saw them. My mother's hand flew to her mouth, her eyes widening in a mixture of surprise and something else, something I couldn't quite decipher. My father's face remained impassive, but I saw a flicker of something in his eyes, a brief, unguarded moment of what looked like fear. The ceremony was a blur. I went through the motions, smiling, clapping, congratulating Ethan and his new wife, a lovely woman named Emily. But my mind was elsewhere, my thoughts consumed by the impending confrontation. At the reception, I found myself seated at a table with my parents. The silence was deafening, a thick, suffocating blanket of unspoken words. Finally, my mother spoke, her voice trembling slightly. "Daniel," she said, "I'm so glad you came." I looked at her, my face a mask of stone. "I'm here for Ethan," I said, my voice cold and flat. My father cleared his throat, a sound that was both a nervous tick and a prelude to a pronouncement. "Your mother and I, we've made a lot of mistakes," he said, his voice gruff, unaccustomed to admissions of fault. "We know we hurt you." The words were so inadequate, so ridiculously insufficient, that I almost laughed. "Hurt me?" I said, my voice rising with a sudden surge of anger. "You didn't hurt me. You abandoned me. You left me to fend for myself at a gas station 80 miles from home. I was 12 years old. I slept behind a dumpster. Did you know that? Did you ever once stop to think about what might have happened to me?" My mother's face crumpled, the carefully constructed facade of composure finally cracking. We were at our wits' end," she stammered, her voice choked with tears. "You were such a difficult child. We didn't know what to do." The excuse was so pathetic, so self-serving, that it was almost comical. "A difficult child?" I repeated, my voice dripping with sarcasm. "So your solution was to throw me away like a piece of trash?" My father slammed his hand on the table, his face turning a blotchy red. "Don't you dare talk to your mother that way," he snarled, the old, familiar rage flaring in his eyes. "We did what we thought was best." "Best for who?" I shot back, my own anger now a raging inferno. "Best for you?" "Because it certainly wasn't best for me." The argument escalated from there, a torrent of accusations and recriminations, of 15 years of pent-up anger and resentment finally unleashed. We were causing a scene, of course. The other guests were staring, their faces a mixture of curiosity and discomfort. Ethan rushed over, his face pale with distress. "What's going on?" he asked, his eyes pleading with us to stop. "Your brother is here to celebrate his wedding," my father said, his voice a low growl. "And you're ruining it with your drama." The word was like a slap in the face. Drama. As if the trauma I had endured was nothing more than a childish tantrum. That was when I knew. I knew that there would be no apologies, no remorse, no understanding. They were incapable of it. They were trapped in their own narrative, their own self-serving justifications. And I would never be able to break through. I stood up, my chair scraping against the floor. "I'm done," I said, my voice shaking with a mixture of anger and a profound, bone-deep sadness. "I'm done with all of you." I turned to Ethan, my heart aching for him. "I'm sorry, Ethan," I said, my voice softening. "I'm truly happy for you. But I can't do this. I can't pretend to be a part of this family anymore." And with that, I walked away. I walked away from the wedding, from the vineyard, from the people who had given me life and then had so carelessly thrown it away. I walked away from the past, from the pain, from the hope that had been a flickering flame in my heart for so long. As I drove away, the tears that I had held back for so long finally came, a flood of grief and loss and a strange, unexpected sense of relief. I was free. I was finally, truly free. The next few days were a blur of emotions. I was angry, I was sad, I was relieved. But most of all, I was tired. Tired of carrying the weight of my past, tired of letting it define me. I told Sarah everything that had happened. She held me as I cried, her love a soothing balm on my wounded soul. "You did the right thing," she said, her voice a soft murmur against my hair. "You chose yourself. And that's the most important thing." A few days later, a package arrived in the mail. It was from Ethan. Inside was a letter, his familiar, sprawling handwriting filling several pages. He apologized for what had happened at the wedding, for the pain our parents had caused me. He told me that he had never known the full story of what had happened that night, that our parents had fed him a sanitized version of events. He said that he had confronted them after I had left, and that for the first time in his life, he had seen them for who they really were, selfish, cruel, and incapable of love. He told me that he and Emily were moving to another state, that they were starting a new life, away from the toxicity of our family. And he told me that he loved me, that he had always loved me, and that he hoped that one day, we could build a new kind of family, a family based on love and respect and a shared understanding of the pain we had both endured. The letter was a gift, a lifeline in a sea of turmoil. It was a reminder that I was not alone, that I had a brother who loved me, who saw me, who understood. It was a promise of a future that was not defined by the past, but by the choices we made in the present. The road to healing is a long one, I know. There are still days when the anger and the sadness threaten to overwhelm me. But now, there is also hope. Hope for a future where I am not just a survivor, but a thriver. A future where I am surrounded by love, not by the ghosts of a family that never was. A future where I am finally, truly, at peace. And as I sit here, writing this, I realize that this is not just my story. It is a story for anyone who has ever felt lost, abandoned, or alone. It is a story that says that it is okay to walk away from the people who hurt you, even if they are your family. It is a story that says that you are worthy of love, of happiness, of a life that is free from the shadows of the past. It is a story that says that you are not defined by what has been done to you, but by the choices you make, the love you give, and the life you build for yourself. And that, I think, is a story worth telling.